For those who do not know, in Foco, we've been around since 1974. We're a nonprofit that supports US-based photographers of African, Asian, Latinx, Native American, and Pacific Islander heritage. We make their work visible in the art world. We do exhibitions. We have the world famous Nueva Luz publication. We offer workshops, events, and opportunities for professional growth for the artists. Our partner this evening is the Caribbean Cultural Center for African Diaspora Institute in the Arts. They are a nonprofit organization, arts and cultural organization, educational organization, a media organization that advances cultural equity, racial and social justice for African descendant communities. The Caribbean Cultural Center envisions a global landscape, again, where African descendants achieve cultural equity, racial and social justice, and they'll be joining us today. They're one of our sponsors. Welcome to them. I want to take the time to introduce you all to somebody very important to Foco, one of our new staff members, has been with us for several months now, and she is serving as our Curator-at-Large, Tarisse Iriarte. She's going to be our moderator today. She is going to help provide the conversation. And again, for Foco, this is something that started roughly about 4 years ago, when we took an inventory of our archives, and we really realized the wealth that we had within our archives. And we knew that there was opportunities for us to start to showcase some of that work and to really start to highlight the legacy of some of the amazing artists that we've been working with, over 400 at this point. This is an effort that is going to be a part of a larger archival effort that we're working at. It's an adjunct to our early history, right? It's very pivotal to the future of our organization, that we talk about our archives, that we bring them to life. And also it's an opportunity for us to show how we're taking responsibility, again, for the work of several generations of photographers. You know, what happens when artists are aged? What happens when they pass? What happens to their work? What happens to their legacy? You know, these are the questions that we grapple with. And these are some of the things that obviously some of our panelists are going to speak about today. What is their work in relation to that? And again, how do we continue to use that as a space to move forward? Brief introduction to Tarisse. Again, she is an independent curator. She's an activist, right? She comes from Brooklyn, very proud Afro-Caribbean, Cuban and Puerto Rican woman. If you want, you can call her T, right? You know, she is, her work has been at the center of not only unearthing stories throughout the diaspora, but she's also very eager and finds importance in talking about things like global liberation and again, socially and engaged art across the diaspora, across social political work. She's not only worked with Foco more recently, but she's also served as part of the board for Arte. She's a member of NALAC, and she's also a member of the American Association, the Association of Art Museum Curators. Please join Tarisse. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. I am Tarisse Iriarte. I am calling and joining you live and direct from Puerto Rico right now, along with one of the other panelists who is joining us from the Dominican Republic. And I want to just thank you all for joining us this evening, and a special thank you to our panelists for sharing their work and their wisdom with us this evening. Caribbean Cultural Center actually played a significant role in my life in particular. And so I want to thank them in particular about the work that they've done, that they've contributed to Afro-diasporans, specifically Latinx folks who haven't had an opportunity to engage in the Caribbean. And I know I was part of a program there. Also, Stephanie and Chayanne was part of a program through Caribbean Cultural Center. So we have a significant and very unique relationship with the Caribbean Cultural Center as a whole. So thank you, Melody, and everyone who contributed to our evolution as creatives. I think it's very important for us to continue this work and this conversation. And part of the reason we decided to do this particular program is because we wanted to honor the Living Black Archive, and because it's an expression of the sacred ways that we've been able to preserve, protect, and continue honoring the cultural memory of our ancestors, of our people, of our communities. And so this event was birthed with that in mind, particularly as we pay homage to our dear Hiram Maristany, who lovingly dedicated over 60 years of his life to documenting Puerto Ricans in East Harlem, most notably the Young Lords Party. The impact of his legacy has inspired like new generations of memory workers, researchers, and archivists who have grounded and expanded their archival practice into amplifying our diasporic histories and contemporary life and futures via the Black Archive. So this is a very special moment for all of us in honoring him and honoring his family and honoring his legacy, and being joined at this point of continuity in these new archivists, the next generation of archivists that are joining us this evening. At this time, I want to take a moment to introduce our moderator, Melody Capote.
Good evening. Thank you, T. Thanks for having us at the center represented here today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Melody Capote is a very special person to me in particular, and also, as I mentioned earlier, contributed to my evolution as a creative and to my curatorial practice. So thank you for that, Melody, and the Caribbean Cultural Center as a whole, Dr. Morena Vega, and everyone who, and Regina Butron and other folks who lend their expertise to cultivating relationships and cultivating ideas and events that help us evolve as creatives. So Melody was appointed as Executive Director of Caribbean Cultural Center in 2018. She began her long tenure at the organization in 1984, and throughout the years has established herself as a leader in arts administration and cultural activism. She is a vocal and bold voice in advocating for cultural equity, racial and social justice for African descendant communities. Welcome, Melody. Also, Chayanne Marcano, who is our panelist this evening, is an artist and a writer born and raised in the Bronx, New York. Shout out to the VX. Her research interests include space, place, and belonging. Currently, she is the associate producer at the interdisciplinary arts institution Abrams Art Center in New York City's Lower East Side. She has supported archival research for projects with the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Association of African American Life and History. Welcome, Chayanne. Our other panelist is Ms. Stephanie Alvarado. Stephanie is a queer, gender, non-binary, disabled femme, anti-discriminatory artist, poet, archivist, photographer, facilitator, and cultural organizer for 20 years. Stephanie was born and raised in the Bronx, New York. Again, shout out to the VX, by way of Guayaquil, Ecuador. They alchemized photography, feminist performance, community-based photo archiving, and political education into community building and social justice practices in public spaces for people of color. Their work is rooted in spiritual community healing, social justice, and local memory. They host intergenerational photo archiving teach-ins on public park land and community gardens to reclaim public space as cultural reparations for Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Thank you and welcome, Stephanie. Melody will then talk about her relationship with Hiram Maristany and his legacy and how it's contributing to the archival practices of today.
Good evening, and thank you for having me and for the partnership between the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, and in Foco. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be part of this evening's program. One, because Hiram was a very dear and close friend, not only to me, but to my family. And to be within the family that is T and Stephanie and Chayanne, who have all been part of the center's programming and to whom we've watched grow over the past few years. We talk about archiving, and the definition of an archivist speaks to someone who's specially trained in preserving original documents and material. And that archivists work with photographs and maps and films and records that oftentimes are not as readily available to the public as we would like. When we look at the work of Hiram Maristany, he brings our history, our culture to life. And I want to step back a little bit about the history with Hiram that'll bring us up to speed on today's program. I met Hiram when I was about 13 years old at El Museo del Barrio, when Marta Moreno Vega, both founder of the center and then second director to El Museo, came to the organization and established it in a series of storefronts on 3rd Avenue between 107th Street and 109th Street. And Hiram became the photographer of all things Museo back in those days. So as I said, I was 13. I used to come every day after work, after school, and participate in programming at the center. And it's the first time I get exposed to the photos, some of the photos that you're seeing. And the beauty in the work of Hiram's lens, Hiram's eyes, was really looking at community that regularly dealt with poverty, regularly was viewed as ghetto and poor and the grit of a people. And what he did through the work was really look at the beauty of a people that recreated home, recreated the island feel in a neighborhood that many had fled. El Barrio starts with families, Jewish families, Italian families, and as the Puerto Ricans came in, everybody fled. And the photos, as you're seeing here, really speak to the way we had to make things happen. Looking at this shot of the hydrant, what we used to call la pompa, the Johnny pump, was because we weren't allowed to go to the pools. They did not allow Blacks and Puerto Ricans to the pools. And so we found an alternative, la pompa, right? The earlier images, you saw there was one of a young man holding a rose, and I remember seeing that photo with Hiram, and he says, you know what really cool, if you can go back to that, Oscar, that one, he's holding the roses, but he says, you know what really drew me to this photo were the sneakers. And I said, the sneakers? He says, yeah, because once your sneakers were worn out, we used to throw them up on the phone lines and they would hang and dangle from the phone lines. And it was part of what decorated the streets. And so the way he saw us, the way he saw neighborhood, the way he saw community was different, had a different twist. In addition to looking at the world through kind of this Afrocentric lens, it was a gentle lens, a kind lens. It was one that really allowed him to connect and communicate with community. The story as I hear it is, he was a teenager himself when he got his first camera. He loved it. He did a lot of work with it. He went to his mom. I met his mom. I met all his sisters. I remember his daughter being born. I mean, we were family. And he tells the tale that he went to his mom and says, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to be a photographer. And the mom said to him, there are no Puerto Rican photographers. There ain't no money in being a photographer. You're not going to be a photographer. You need a real job. And after doing this work and after photographing the people and folks seeing the work, he came back a few months later and said to her again, "I'm going to be a photographer." And she said, yeah, she's now hearing people in the street reacting to seeing their stories in these black and white photos. And the mom was like, yeah, I think you got something here. There's something going on here. You're good. And so I think that, as I said, we started at El Museo. He was photographing scenes on the street. Not many people know that although Hiram was not very tall, Hiram played some b-ball. He played serious basketball. And so the ball players all knew him. The guys on the street all knew him. We saw shots of like women sitting on the stoop. Everyone started to become, when they saw him, they knew him as the guy with the camera. This scene, I love this scene. We don't see kids playing in the street anymore like you see here, right? We used to have some hopscotch, and I think the scene that you see toward the back with the boys, one boy down on his knees, skelsies, and the drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. What is it they say is one man's garbage is another man's gold? In this instance, when you're seeing kids on the street playing with chalk, we're not defacing. In fact, they're drawing and expressing and playing and doing. And he captured that. He captured that in every moment, in every photograph. There's a story he shared. I think he also shared this in an interview for the Smithsonian or the New York Times, where he tells the story of a attending the funeral of someone who a young man that he had photographed. And he shows up to the funeral with these beautiful images of this young man. And the family was just so very, very moved. And he knew he had something in his art. He knew that there was something there. This image of the Young Lords, again, kind of the unofficial photographer for the Young Lords party, he was always there. He showed up, he documented, he had it all on film. And I think there are conversations I've had with Felipe when they both considered themselves brothers. Felipe says, Hiram captured things that I look at them now and I forgot. It's a way of being able to remember. And to remember is archiving. I think one of the things we learned, and I learned very young through the work at El Museo with Marta, my mother also worked at El Museo and at the Caribbean Cultural Center, is that we intentionally are not building an institution that is about collections. Oh, wait, I have to stop and talk about this photo. This was the garbage offensive of the Young Lords. And I remember vividly walking in the street with my grandmother and some of her friends, and these older women all being kind of appalled by this gang that was making this mess in the street. And I was 6 years old. I didn't know any better. And I remember that in being in the street and kind of that feeling of, ooh, right? This thing that was happening in the streets and this gang. And a couple of days later, these same women are sitting in my grandmother's kitchen and they're talking about, they're not a gang. Do you realize what these guys are doing, what they did? This called attention to the way that our streets and our neighborhoods have been ignored by the sanitation department. Garbage hasn't been picked up here regularly. And these guys took over a church on 111th Street and they're serving breakfast. And these guys, all of a sudden, this gang, right, what they envisioned to be gang members, all of a sudden became kind of these saviors, these angels in our community. And to see this image and to see this image as it lives, as we're looking at it right now, if you don't understand the history and the connection to why this was done, then yeah, it's ew. Look at what's going on. But it's the telling of the story and the documenting of that movement that Hiram did that tells the story through an accurate lens, right? Because we know the press did a number on the Lords, and the press did a number on these things that they did, taking over Lincoln Hospital, taking over the church. It's how the story is told, folks. It's how the story is told. here on 111th and Lexington Avenue. I was at this event when they renamed the corner Young Lord's Way. Again, I'm a firm believer, especially as folks were taking down this movement to take down the monuments of these white men who were slave owners and who continue to be honored throughout history with these monuments and statues in parks and in streets. Our monuments are our institutions. The Caribbean Cultural Center on 125th Street between Lexington and Park Avenue is a monument. And so as we look at these various, the buildings, the First People's Church, people like Denise Oliver, you know, just maybe a teenager, maybe in her 20s, but a teenager, maybe the fact that we have been able to tell the stories of these movements in a way that shows history and shows the contribution and shows the need to not only preserve this and document it by our own terms, but being able to then share it generation after generation, because we have the story there. It's not put away somewhere. It's accessible and it's available to our young people, to our community members, and to all people, right? But it tells the story correctly, accurately, and not interpreted by someone else.
Hi, my name is Hiram Maristany. I'm a photographer from New York, El Barrio to be specific. I'm here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Photography is part history, part documentation, and more importantly, it was more cultural identity. Growing up in East Harlem in that area, I'm talking the early and mid-'60s, it was a very tough reality. It was enormous amounts of violence. There was also a lack of space. It's no accident that a lot of the images are of 111th Street. That's the street that I was born and raised in. We, young men, were always finding a way to play. And one of the safe places that we had as a haven was rooftops. Okay. And rooftops gave us a different perspective, that we were not victims. A night view is to me, very significant, because it speaks of, it tries to show what I think is the beautiful of our community. It has three elements. It has a sky, a mid-view, and then it has a play street. And it shows people moving around in this urban environment, and we're not confined by our poverty. Casa Iveta, which is this huge building that is, well, not the high view, but it's a higher view looking down on this building. And what I was most pleased with is that the elements of that photograph is very much the way East Harlem looked. And at the bottom of that image, you'll see the way we used to buy clothes. Poor people didn't have the luxury of going in and sitting down and trying a pair of shoes. You pointed to the shoes and you put them on the street. My family's in there. One of my nieces is standing on there. A lot of my work reflects dual realities and, to a certain extent, contradictory realities. In that image, you have both movement and stillness simultaneously. So when you look at the image, you see the spray, and you see some of the joy of being in a hydrant in a community that's 98 degrees, and the heat is everywhere, and this incredible spray of coolness that, anyone who's from East Harlem, anyone that sees that, they know immediately what's going on. I lived at 64 East Harlem 11th Street. I lived on the ground floor. When I looked out of my window, I saw that hydrant every day of my life. El lechon is the roasting of a pig, okay? That has a lot of traditional values in Puerto Rico. It speaks to the gathering of people that are going to be celebrating, okay? And it's the kind of a thing that speaks to the way East Harlem used to be. You know, it was very, very poor, but we were not defined by our poverty. And in my way, I think that I tried to respond to attempting to level the playing field and to show beauty in the community. East Harlem was a beautiful place because of what the people were doing within that space. But there are people that I know that when they come here and they see this, they will feel included in the history of America. Because that's something that so many people take for granted. Truly, my work is a reflection of a love affair that I've had with my community. One day, I think, hopefully I will give some inspiration to some young people or, evolving artists to know their community, to preserve their community, and not allow someone else to do it for them. We have to take responsibility and title to our own history.
You know, when the Smithsonian invited Hiram to display his work, to be part of their archives, he says that he had family members who kept referring to the Smithsonian as Smith and Wesson, because they couldn't say Smithsonian. So it was like, you finally made it, you're in the Smith and Wesson. And these were just stories. He would show up and, whether we went to dinner or he came to visit us at the center, there were always kind of these stories of kind of living on both sides, right? He's done all this work in community and really at a time where he was not getting the recognition. And I know that through the work of the center, what's been very, very valuable to us is that we have been able to acknowledge and celebrate and honor our heroes and our sheroes while they were with us. And Hiram was celebrated time and again through exhibitions and through programs that we did, dedicating ourselves to assuring that he was recognized and that his work was valuable to us and to those around us. So it was really quite moving to see that, institutions and organizations like the Smithsonian, like El Museo del Barrio, folks recognized him while he was with us, because it was 60 years of work, better than about 60 years of work that he did because he loved it. He didn't do it for the fame. He didn't do it for the recognition, but certainly he deserved it. And so the fact that he was able to get to this place and still have his work available to all of us. Yeah, I have some of his work. We have the Young Lord's book that documents all of the photos that he used to document the story of the Young Lords is available. It's just such an honor and a privilege to be able to say that we not only knew him, but we celebrated him in life. And so I want to take this opportunity and use this platform and this example and the title even of tonight's event, Black Living Archives, to really celebrate the work that is being done today by the new generation, younger generation, next leadership in our communities, but also to acknowledge everyone watching this as archivists. We all are archivists. We all, through our music, through our language, through our food, through our writings, through our photographs, have maintained a history and a culture. It's our responsibility to do so. Our homes are living museums. I remember coming to my grandmother's house back in the 60s, and the colors were pink and yellow and teal. And as a kid, it was beautiful. I didn't understand then why. Big, though, I think everyone on the panel is probably too young, but my grandmother had sofa covers with big pink flamingos and big pink and blue flowers. And it's not until I was older and in a conversation with my own mother that I understood, my mother having come from Puerto Rico to New York and saying that upon arriving, how ugly this city was, that it was gray and black and dark, coming from a place that was pink and blue and yellow and happy and bright. And as she shared that with me, she says, and that is why when you walk into your grandmother's home, you see these colors. She's recreated home, not home as defined or determined in New York City, but she brought Puerto Rico with her to El Barrio. And then of course, the smells, the food, right? I still to this day love the smell of recaído, cilantro. I love the smell of that. And she would always kind of stir fry that with some onions before starting any food. And that lives in me. I can smell it as I'm talking. So I say that because we are, as individuals, responsible for being able to pass on these traditions and cultures in our very homes, in the music that we play, in the stories that we tell. Now, all of a sudden, in the last few years, storytelling has become a thing. Everybody wants to tell a story. We've been telling stories. In African traditions, we have the griot, right? In Puerto Rico, what was the singing newspaper? El pregón, los pregones. In the bomba en plena, everything we do is tell a story. Mataron Elena, mataron Elena. I mean, all of these songs are stories of things that happened in communities, some made up, some not so much, but it's our responsibility as individuals, as family members, as institution builders, and as we'll see this evening from our presenters this evening, being able to take the word archivist and really make it one that is a living tradition. One that says that, yes, I'm gathering and I'm collecting and I'm preserving, but I'm also promulgating it. I'm also presenting it. I'm making it available to the world. And for that reason, the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute is not a museum. We are not about having a collection, but our archives, and now as we come back into our real space, because we've been closed for almost 3 years, it's how do we activate the over 45 years of conversations, of art, of presentations, of concerts that we have presented at a time when no one was doing it. And I'll say that again, at a time when no one was doing it. Our work looks at the common thread we share as people of African descent. So our story as Puerto Ricans is a very similar story as folks from Jamaica, folks from Haiti, the Dominican Republic. That's our responsibility. And so, T, are we going on to our first panelist, or are both panelists coming in? I forgot, so I'm sorry.
Yes. Chayanne, we'll go with Chayanne and learn about the work that Chayanne is doing, the beautiful projects that she is working on, and celebrate her work, and learn a little bit more about her archival practice and what she's been doing in terms of digitizing, what she's been doing in terms of diving into the living Black archive as she sees it.
So Chayanne, I'm going to introduce you so that you can talk a little bit about your work. But as I was saying, both T, Chayanne, and Stephanie have all participated in programs at the center where they really started to kind of gather the skills to do the work by their terms. And one of the projects was our Community Arts Without Walls project, where both T and Chayanne participated. And we used the community and community institutions in Puerto Rico to teach about our culture. They weren't sitting in a classroom reading it in a book or seeing it in photos. They lived the experience every day of this fellowship that they participated in. And Stephanie also participated in a program which was our ICA program, Innovative Cultural Advocacy Program. And to see them today doing this work just thrills me to no end. And with that, I will introduce you to Chayanne Marcano.
Thank you so much, Melody, for that beautiful introduction and the reflections that you shared earlier about Hiram. Thank you to Foco, Danny, T, Oscar, and Kim for the invitation. Thank you again to Caribbean Cultural Center. Participating in community arts without walls really allowed me to see myself on the island of Puerto Rico, to think of a family outside of my blood family, but a chosen family that is aligned in values and a commitment to social justice. And I give thanks to my co-panelist, Stephanie Alvarado. I'm excited to be in conversation with you later. So again, everyone, my name is Chayanne Marcano. I'm a writer and artist from the Bronx, New York, and to offer some context on where I am, as T shared earlier, I'm currently in the Dominican Republic with my family. My father got married about a week ago. So if you hear the sounds of El Gran Cambo or cheering children, those are the sounds of my family celebrating. And if you hear crying, that's my youngest brother having a tantrum. I'll also say that because I am in the Dominican Republic, my Wi-Fi may go in and out. And with that, I really lean on the support of the Foco team. Please do not hesitate to let me know if I start to cut out. I want to be sure that I pause when that happens. So I come to this conversation as an archivist in the sense that I care deeply about objects and materials that hold information. And when I say that, I'm not only thinking about things that are in glass cases or manila folders, but I'm thinking of my journals, my grandfather Eddie, his old IDs, my mother Rachel, her poems, my grandmother and Ida and Noelia, I'm thinking of their family photographs. I also come to this conversation as someone who needs the Living Black Archive and depends on it to do my work as an independent researcher. The research projects I lead and support are rooted in a sense of recovery. I'm often drawn to Black and Afro-Caribbean narratives and histories, misunderstood, forgotten, but dearly loved and appreciated by those in the know. I turn to the Living Black Archive as evidence to say we were there, it happened, and this is how. My work takes me to institutional archives, some of which are really hard to access, to be honest, and it can take a lot of time to get appointments for. And so here I give big ups to Stephanie for the work that she's doing to bring this practice of archiving to communities and families. The first project I'll talk about is the Last Address Tribute. This is an initiative by Visual AIDS. Visual AIDS is a New York City organization that's at the forefront of archiving and displaying works by artists who have passed due to AIDS-related complications and artists who are living with HIV today. The Last Address Tribute is a memorial walk that visits the former homes of artists lost to AIDS. In recent years, they've expanded the walk to include places that have been shaped by HIV and AIDS activism and queer cultural history in New York City. The idea of the tribute walk comes from art historian Alex Fiallo, who led past walks in the East Village, Chelsea, and Times Square, but the poet and activist Panelists had always wanted to bring the walk to Harlem. And so it was during my time at the Studio Museum where we were able to make this possible. So to talk about AIDS, to this day, AIDS is often thought of as an issue that doesn't affect Black and Brown communities, let alone straight people, right? That's a myth. Also, the history of AIDS activism is often represented as white and male. That's another myth. And so in going to the archive, and in this case, it's the Schomburg Center, I was looking to support those who have been doing this work in correcting this history. You'll notice the photographs that I'm sharing of this project are not from the Schomburg. And this is because these are digitized photographs from a different library. The photographs that I have of the Schomburg, I'm not able to share them publicly in this way because it requires me to go through a whole permission, request for permission process. And I think that alone speaks to the importance of digitization as a tool in making these archives more accessible to more people. So to talk about the photograph that we have on the screen, we see 5 Black men held together in an embrace. It's clear that they found kinship and belonging in each other. And as the caption says, they are members of the collective Other Countries. Other Countries was founded in '86 and was formed by Black gay men who organized to develop, promote, and cultivate a literary movement relevant to the experience of Black gay men. The work of Other Countries worked against that overrepresentation of white people in AIDS activism and against the exclusion of stories about Black people who were impacted by the AIDS crisis. And so the Schomburg has their papers on file. And I remember how I felt coming across the writings of Other Countries in their archive, that these were men who had passed. They exist on a different plane, but through their words, they came to me alive. Next slide, please. And so to see their writings and their funeral programs exist in the same record was sobering. On the screen, we have a portrait by photographer Robert Giard of poet, activist, and filmmaker Donald Woods. Woods was born on December 18th, 1957, and he transitioned on June 25th, 1992. He was a member of Other Countries and a student of Audre Lorde. So with that connection, we see how Other Countries was taking inspiration from the literary activism that was coming from Black lesbian and feminist writers like Lorde, Barbara Smith, June Jordan. And so when I look at this photograph of Woods, I feel a weight. This is the photograph that was on the front page of his funeral service program. And so with the height of the AIDS epidemic, death is highly politicized, which means that funerals are also sites where folks are mobilizing change, because to be Black and to die of AIDS meant something. Pamela Sneed, going back to her, I want to bring her words into the room. She talks about a moment when a fellow poet and member of Other Countries, Assata Saint, approached the altar. She wrote, like a Parisian model walking on a runway with determination, speed, and attitude, he stormed the pulpit uninvited, slammed his hand on the Bible as one wants to tell truth. To everyone's shock, he screamed, Donald Woods was a proud Black gay man. He did not die of heart failure. He died of AIDS. If you agree with me, stand up. And so I pause there again to say that even in death, they are collectivizing, they are mobilizing. Next slide, please. I only have a few more minutes left, so I will mosey on through this. But this is a project now with the Met. So next month, the Met will open their first exhibition dedicated to Juan de Pareja. This is a portrait of him on the screen. As a painter of Afro-Hispanic descent in his own right, Pareja worked as an enslaved studio assistant in the studio of master painter Diego Velázquez in 17th century Spain. And so the co-curators of the exhibition, David Pullins, Vanessa Valdez, take this portrait as a point of departure to talk about enslaved labor on the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, which is to say that our people were there too. There's such an emphasis on the Caribbean and the Americas, but to think about our ancestors also being in Europe during this time. And so with Juan de Pareja comes Schomburg, Arthur Schomburg, the bibliophile, self-taught person that he was. Of course, he knew who Pareja was, and he had sought to learn as much as he could about Pareja and the other Afro descendants that were in Sevilla in the 17th century. Next slide, please. And so here, this is a page from Schomburg's personal photo album of his travels to Sevilla. This brings me a lot of joy, just thinking about Arthur Schomburg capturing this history with his own camera. He is photographing different sites of Black history in Spain. And at the top here, we can see streets here of yesteryear Negroes lived near the chapel, and he's writing the names of those different spaces. And I'll say that this project took me to Schomburg's photographs, it took me to his letters, his writings, and it taught me a lot of patience. It taught me how to respect the spirit of the archive, that just because materials exist, it doesn't mean that they're going to reveal themselves to you. It made me think about Schomburg, how long he must have held these questions inside of him, and the joy and the thrill he must have found when he got those answers or felt close to them. And with this project, I felt that there's a lot of magic in the archive. There are so many unknowns. There's so many leads that you're following that you don't know where they're going to go. And so much of it kind of feels like putting together clues. Next slide, please. So I don't have much time left, but I will say that I hope that we can come back to this in our discussion. But this is a project on the Statue of Liberty, and I'll be honest in that as someone who's been raised in New York, I never really cared much about the Statue of Liberty, but this project has allowed me to see differently. The story of immigration is often seeming as this Eastern European or Southern European narrative. And so this project focused solely on representations of the Statue of Liberty in Black contemporary art, Black visual culture. So that first photograph is a photograph of immigrants from Guadeloupe. And the second by a white photographer, I should say, who worked at Ellis Island. And then the second photograph is of the Statue of Liberty by a Black GI who lived in Harlem in the 30s and 60s. And I put those two because I think they create an interesting contrast in that with Sherman taking that photograph of the 3 Guadeloupean women, he's on Ellis Island. You can kind of see that they're uncomfortable by him taking that photograph. And with the second photograph, G.L. Hicks is on a boat at a distance of the Statue of Liberty. And I think so much is revealed through this. I'll say that with this project, I'm thinking of Hiram, that it gave me a sense of how to look and what to look for. And so to wrap, I'll say that work pertaining to the archive is never complete, and that we can find joy in knowing that archives and the Living Black Archive, that they're like us, always in a process of becoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Chayanne. Next, we'd like to welcome Stephanie Alvarado. Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. Buenas tardes. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us on this Thursday evening. Hopefully y'all had some dinner, something. Hopefully y'all are munching on something while you're watching with us. Thank you so much for being here. And shout out to those who watch this later on, who are not here now, who'll watch it later. This itself is an archive. First, I just want to say thank you so much to Foco, to Caribbean Cultural Center, to my fellow panelists, Chayanne and Melody for moderating. And thank you so much to T for curating and Danny and the whole team at Foco, who have been really beautiful and welcoming throughout this process. Thank you. I want to share a story with y'all today about how I met my good friend, Kathleen Cleaver, and how we began to create her personal family archive together back in 2015. And I'm going to share some images from her archive with y'all tonight, and then transition into sharing about my personal project called Fotos y Recuerdos. And since we've been lifting up so many ancestors throughout this whole session, I want to lift up Pella McDaniels, who was the person who acquired Kathleen's archive at Emory. This project started off in Kathleen's attic. And we met at a movie theater in Atlanta. And at the time I was going to school in Atlanta. I was in a PhD program and I didn't finish, which is one of the best decisions I've ever made. And she helped me basically finish that program. She and I met at the movie theater. I introduced myself, obviously, and then we bumped into each other again at Emory, where she was lecturing at the law school. And we became friends ever since, pretty much. And at the time, she helped me with my dissertation. She signed off on my dissertation. She coached me throughout many racist things that happened at Emory in that department. And if it wasn't for her, I would not have survived that process. And I share that to be totally transparent and to illustrate how archives, building community and friendships are all intertwined. And just to illustrate just how generous Kathleen is with her time and her energy. And pretty much after I was done with my program, she contacted me to help her organize her photographs in her home. It was the first time that she had all her belongings in one place. And she invited me to come to her house and go to her attic and figure out all the photographs and start cataloging them, start organizing them by year. And it became a routine for us. Every week, she'd come pick me up. We'd get food. Sometimes she'd make collard greens for us, her favorite food. And she would be so generous with her time and thought that us two, would be able to get through a lot. And eventually, we obviously learned that we needed to have more support. And so we contacted Lee Rayford from UC Berkeley to help us expand the archival team. And then we welcomed Sierra King, Delphine Sims, John Stevens, and Leah Bascombe. So shout out to them. And since 2015, we've been working on this project. And it literally started off with a conversation. And throughout this conversation, we built a friendship. And I'm really honored to be here to share these images from the archive. So the goal with the archive was to get it acquired. So shout out again to Pella McDaniels, who helped us do that in 2020. He passed away in April 2020, and this archive was his last acquisition. So it was a really big deal. And the goal after getting it acquired was to create an exhibition. So we're in the process now, working with Auburn Avenue Library in Atlanta to exhibit this collection. And the goal with the collection and kind of the exhibit we want to show is to show Kathleen in another light, in like a more joyous, sort of like free, leisurely, soft, funny, smiling, gregarious person that she is. Many of the images you see of the Black Panther Party were crafted by Kathleen. She was the first Secretary of Communication. So her eye crafted all the imagery that we know and associate the Black Panther Party with. The berets, the leather jackets, her posing with the gun, all those images that we kind of think about were all specifically crafted and curated by Kathleen. So we want to show another side of Kathleen, more tender side to her. And I think it's important to do so, specifically honoring, and when talking about Black women revolutionaries, to show Black women revolutionaries resting, laughing, mothering, traveling, being themselves. And so here we have an image with Joju and Maceo, who are Kathleen's children, sitting in a zebra print chair while in Algiers. This is circa 1970. You can go on to the next slide. And this was a gem that we found. This is Kathleen's individual cheerleading coach photo with her squad. It's amazing. You can go on to the next one. And this is another image I wanted to share with her, being in conversation and talking with Julia Wright for her work around Free Mumia. And this is shot by St. Clair Bourne around 1995 while they were in Paris. And then this image is Kathleen and Maceo, her son, sitting with Joju Cleaver, her daughter, holding her newborn son, Coyote, with their dad, Geronimo Pratt, who was also a political prisoner who was released, part of the Black Panther Party as well. And this last image is really special. This is Kathleen visiting Yuri Kochiyama in Oakland, California, in a nursing home while Yuri was there. And she's gifting her a copy of Herman Ferguson's memoir, An Unlikely Warrior. And this is around 2013. And what these images show is Kathleen being with her family, being with her friends, Kathleen being in her role of bringing people together. The title of the exhibition is called The Worlds That She Made. She had a very interesting life. She went to high school in India. She traveled a lot really young. And most of the time that she was in the Panther Party, she was in exile. So there was lots of photographs of her time in that time of her period, in that period of her life. And and so these are images that I wanted to share that show her in a different light. These have never been seen before. So the next slide. Cool. And so that leads me to my work with Fotos y Recuerdos. And this project was inspired by my work with Kathleen that started in 2015. This project started in Wave Hill in 2020 while I was in a residency there at Wave Hill. And these images were taken by Shaira Shaer, Joji Esparza, and Isabel Figueroa, who were my collaborators for the programming that I put on at Wave Hill for the Family Art Project. And what Fotos y Recuerdos is basically an invitation to disrupt archiving as we know it. It's an invitation to take archiving in our own hands and to center specifically and unapologetically Black and Brown Indigenous people of color. I often, when I was talking to T about this project, I told them it's kind of like the approach that Toni Morrison says when she writes. She's like, she's not writing for the white gaze ever. And this is what Fotos y Recuerdos is about. In this work, we not only give tools to people to archive their own photographs and stories, we also hold the workshops in public spaces and in gardens. So it started off at Wave Hill. I've done workshops at Kelly Street Garden and at Inwood Park. And so part of that intention of being in public spaces like community gardens and parks is to take up public space. to reclaim cultural reparations and land as we know it. And I want to name that specifically as someone who has US citizenship, as someone who is living on Lenape land, and as someone who recognizes that the United States is the only former colony that continues to colonize. So if you let that sink in for a second, the United States is the only former colony that continues to colonize. And so knowing these structures that we are working within and how white supremacy works and how erasure of our histories and our stories work in this country, it is extremely political and extremely intentional to take up space publicly and to center Black and Brown people in the process. And so these photographs show family portraits. So what we do is we take family portraits, we print out the pictures on site, we give family members and children archival sleeves, cotton gloves, number 2 pencils, and acid-free paper, as well as an archive toolkit to help them navigate their own photo albums, their own stories back at home. And in this particular workshop, we collaged with healing herbs. So we incorporate rose, lavender, calendula, chamomile, mint, herbs that are healing and bring joy. And so these materials for collaging are also super intentional as we talk about like spiritual healing and how archives live in a liminal space. We're time traveling every time that we talk about this. Archives bring together the spiritual realm and the physical realm, the earthy realm that we live in. When we talk about memory, I intentionally do workshops that are trauma informed, that honor the fact that not all memories are good. We may have some painful memories and some really joyful memories. And it's important to hold this in community specifically because we hold each other up like that. There may be memories that I never want to remember, but my sister may remember for me because the pain is too much for me, you know, or there may be times of joy that I may not recall, but my partner may remember for me. When we do these workshops in communities, we see that others people's memories start to be jogged by other folks sharing theirs. And it's also really intentional for this work to honor the intergenerational pieces when it comes to archiving, as well as working intentionally with communities that have issues of memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's. I connect those 2 issues explicitly around disability justice and access to archiving as well with this project. And my goal with it is to continue to work with communities, continue to have public programming, and to continue to help folks understand and empower themselves, because we all are already empowered, to do this work for themselves and to remember that our stories are valid, our stories are important, and that they will not be erased in this fascist country or in any fascist institution. And it's also an invitation to imagine outside of an institution. It's important to imagine new realities and new worlds outside of nonprofits. The Black Panther Party existed in a time before nonprofits. Nonprofits were explicitly created to combat radical movements like the Young Lords, like the Black Panthers, right? And so taking this this approach of workshop and teach-ins in public spaces with archives is my way of kind of trying to work outside of the institution and imagine a new way of sharing and collecting and memories together as a community. And it also helps us imagine new possibilities of what repositories can look like, what maybe cooperatively run archives can look like, cooperatively run repositories can look like, you know, and it also intentionally leverages resources for community members. All these materials are expensive. Archival sleeves, Polaroid prints that I use, photo paper, acid-free paper. All of this is expensive materials. And so I intentionally leverage whatever stipend, whatever funds that I get in order to provide these materials for free for all community members who come to the workshops. And it's also a way of us celebrating and archiving our joy in doing so. These children in the workshop the first time that they ever touched a photograph was that day. And it was amazing to see their joy in their face, you know, and to feel so affirmed and to feel so seen. So that is pretty much, you know, what I wanted to share. I just wanted to thank everybody again for their time, and shout out to everybody who's here watching. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you both for your presentations. And what's interesting is the different approaches you've both taken to this work. The kind of very hands-on experience that you offer communities through your project, specifically, Stephanie. And I was wondering, what is the ultimate intention or goal for each of you of your work as archivists? I mean, you're doing the work now. Hiram did the work then, right? Where do you see what you're doing 25 years from now? You know, where do you see it 5 years from now? And I think that what's really important, and one of the things you shared, Stephanie, is in many instances, it's the first time a kid is holding a photo, because everything now is so quick and so digital, and it's our phones. And it's one of the biggest fights I have with my own kids, my grown kids, where everything we do is a photo moment, you know, a selfie on our phones. And I want a picture. I want the photo. I want to be able to put it somewhere, right? But that's me, and I'm kind of very old school, and behind me are albums, photo albums of like every moment in their lives, right? So for you, Stephanie, and that kind of having made that moment, that was actually a question I was going to have for both of you, which was, you know, in a time where everything is so fast, at a time where, and I opened by saying, you know, we're all archivists, we're all collectors, we're all keepers of traditions in our homes. But it's like, as times change and at the speed that things are happening, where do you see what you're doing in the next 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? If you were to, you know, see the future, what would you like to see happen with the work that you're doing? And I'm going to ask Chayanne to start, since we finished with you, Stephanie, but then certainly pipe in.
Yeah, thinking about holding the photograph, it reminds me that the project with Pareja was my first time using microfilm. So like having to spin those reels, it was a learning curve for me as a, you know, a young millennial. Well, I like the future of this work. I see it truly grounded in curiosity, wanting folks to be curious about what are in these institutions, right? Like Lorraine Hansberry's papers are at the Schomburg. There are so many of these universities have papers that belong to incredible people in our history. And my hope is that folks feel empowered to say, hey, I have a right to look at this material and to do what I want with them. Whether it's in support of their own creative project or a curriculum, that they can take that material that is locked away and to bring it back.
That's it. Stephanie?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, one part for Kathleen's archive, I really want us to get the funding that we need in order to make it happen. You know, I think that it's been an interesting position as an archivist, and then turning into like curator and exhibition mode, and seeing all the details that go into then trying to make this archive accessible to folks and have it be an exhibition, working with Auburn Avenue Library, you know, making an intentional choice to not be like in a gallery somewhere, for example. You know, the goal for her archive is for it to travel. So we want it to eventually open in Atlanta. We want to bring it to the Schomburg, you know. We want to bring it to Oakland. We want to bring it to Alabama. Alabama is where Kathleen is from, and Oakland, obviously, with the history of the Black Panther Party. You know, so that's my goal for the archive, for Kathleen's archive, that we get the funding that the archive deserves to be able to travel and to be able to show and share more of these images. So that's one. And then two, for Fotos y Recuerdos, my goal is to continue to bring this program to more communities in public spaces. So I would say in the next 5 years, I can imagine doing this, you know, focusing in specific boroughs, specific communities, specific community partners. You know, when I first started Fotos y Recuerdos, it was a love letter to the Bronx. And the initial photographs that folks came and brought to my studio, it was basically an open call, my residency at Weave Hill. And every week people would come and bring me their photographs that were taken in the Bronx before 2004, specifically, before smartphones were mainstream. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the idea started, and it's expanded since then. And so I would love to see this program be partnered up with schools, be partnered up with libraries, be partnered up with city municipalities, you know, who probably need the support and visibility to continue to maintain their archives and make it more accessible to people. I'm currently working with a senior center. So I would love to work with more senior centers to do memory and archival work in senior centers, specifically making the connection between, you know, Alzheimer's, dementia, and memory loss. And I also am focusing on specific queer elders too, to honor those of us who've made it that far, those of us who've made it to be elders as queer folks. So yeah, that's kind of like where I see it growing and evolving. And I hope, and one of the questions I always have is about like a repository. You know, at the moment, over the last 3 years of this project has been in process and developing, folks have shared with me about 1,000 photographs that I have, that I've, you know, slowly have been scanning. And I think the more resources I have, the more I'll be able to showcase them. But, you know, it's just been a work in progress. And I think a lot of it is community informed. So I always just, you know, with every workshop I do, I learn something else, but those are the kind of goals that I have so far. So, yeah.
See, I can continue to ask questions, but I think we wanted to open this time up for questions and answers from the audience. I'm not sure if you're managing it from your end. Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Chayanne and Stephanie, for just, oh my God, just celebrating your work and offering up so much of your knowledge about your archival practice and everything. And we want to open it up to the audience so that they can learn more about your archival practice. And also to thank you for the Mellon Foundation and all the folks who have allowed this program to take place tonight. So yeah, let's go. Let's hear these Q&A, this Q&A and questions, and jump right in. Oscar, do you have any questions from the chat?
Hi everyone. So we have one question from Tim Ben, who says, "This is so awesome. I'm a creator in Jamaica, and I just launched a 10-book series of 8 African diaspora puzzle books and 2 44-page African diaspora coloring books. I'm loving what I'm hearing from T. Will I be able to connect and share more about this and see how we can collaborate on this Zoom?"
Well, I'll jump in. I'll jump in and say, I mean, I can't, at this point, I can't promise anything, but I certainly would love to know more about the project that you're doing. So that at the Caribbean Cultural Center, our website is CCCADI.org. That's CCC for Caribbean Cultural Center, ADI, African Diaspora Institute.org. But you know, it's even that, it was the last name Ben, or the name Ben. The fact that you've done this work speaks volumes already to T and to Stephanie and to Chayanne. I mean, this is the model of what our organization is. And we know her, the founder of the organization, Dr. Vega, as an institution builder. I mean, we have to find the space to build and do, right? So So absolutely collaboration is key. I don't think the center would have lasted the 45 years if it wasn't for the partnerships and collaborations that we have not only created, but established as long-term relationships over throughout our history. So one, yes, feel free to reach out to me. Go to our website. There's various emails that you can reach us at to see what the possibilities are to be able to do some collaborative work. But if not us, find with whom, right? Keep doing this work. There was a point, I think it may have been in Cheyenne's presentation where we spoke about even curators or curatorship, right? We have to be responsible for that too. And I say we, all of us, because I remember about 5 years ago when we started seeing and we know this to be true historically, how many of our collections and archives, then Africana collections in major institutions, primarily white Eurocentric institutions, were being managed by white curators. And we as an institution raised the question, like, why? And we actually got responses saying, because we can't find Black curators or Black and brown curators. Are you kidding me?
We've got another question, this one from Adiana. What's the most frustrating thing about being in an archive that you wish you could change?
I love this question. I think Cheyenne and/or Stephanie could address this question.
Stephanie, I took the last one first. So I want to let you take this one.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the most frustrating things about being an archival that I wish I could change. I think I would say, I guess frustrating. I use the word accessibility in this particular way. So one, access to like physically be in there. And then two, when thinking about reaching folks with disabilities, folks who may have physical disabilities or intellectual disabilities, I feel like there's still more work that needs to be done in that area. And I also think that can be frustrating. I mean, I heard you, Chayanne, when you're talking about how hard it is to get those appointments. Like months in advance. I was a research assistant last fall at the Schaumburg, and yeah, I had to wait like 2-3 months to get an appointment. So I think that's frustrating. So I think accessibility really is big, both from like a disability justice perspective and then like literally being able to know where things are and being able to go visit and have that familiarity. And I think that there isn't even a thought of like involving community when it comes to archives. I feel like folks in that world, and I'm a self-taught archivist, by the way. I started when I was an undergrad as a research assistant for Alondra Nelson when she was writing her book, Body and Soul. So she just asked me, can you help me with this? And I was like, yeah. And so I taught myself. And so I know that it was a calling for me, but I know that there's so many other people just like me, just like Chayanne, just like Melody, just like T, who love archiving and will want to know more. And I just wish that there was an easier way to get to. So long.
Thank you for speaking on the access piece.
Mm-hmm.
That is huge. I'll say that like one of the things that I find challenging, so like once you have access, right? This makes me think of the Statue of Liberty project. So that took me to Ellis Island. They have a memorial library. And I come there looking very specifically for photographs of Black people, our people. None of their photographs are tagged or labeled or categorized with that information. And so I had to sift through thousands of files because their system is so old. I can't even look at physical photographs, just clicking through, hoping that I come across a relevant image. And so I'll say that, and that's not only them. I've heard the New York Public Library also has their issues with categorizing materials specifically for people of the African diaspora.
Awesome. All right, so we've got a couple more questions. The next one from an anonymous attendee says, "This was amazing. Thank you. Is there anything that you would like to challenging yourself and making work that you feel you could change?"
I can speak to that. I've been, I need to translate the toolkit. That's one thing that I have yet to do. I have to translate it into Spanish. So the toolkit is a collaboration between me and Sierra. So we did the first toolkit back in 2020. And so since then, I feel obviously in my spirit that it needs to be in multiple languages. So that's one way that I feel like I have to challenge myself for sure, is to get that done.
Okay, Oscar, I'll read the next question. Liv Minig says, what opportunities do you see for connecting with archivists in music, specifically around record, CD collections or collectors, etc.? What ways can we come together and partner?
I can answer that. The center has historically presented a Latin tropical music collectors festival that we did for about 10 years. And the first time we did it, I had no idea what this was going to be like. And it was almost like when folks go antique shopping, we had people there like really, really early before the doors open, waiting to come in and literally use the opportunity to exchange old vinyls, old 78s. I don't even know if you all know what a 78 is. Posters and magazines and photos. And we quickly realized, again, coming to the point of all of us being collectors and being kind of these keepers of traditions, we realized how immediately how important it was to have this event. And we did it for about 10 years. Speaking specifically to, was it Liv? We are launching now in March our Rhythm, Bass, and Place program that is going to be a celebration of Black music. It's a Black music series that we're holding for about 5 months at the center that includes an exhibition, talks, virtual programming, and yes, a coming together of collectors of music. So I encourage you to visit with us or communicate with us to see, you know, if this is something that interests you. Let's see what we could do beyond, you know, getting together once or twice. It's going to be amazing. It launches March 17th and it'll run for about 5 or 6 months.
Awesome. Tia, if I may, I just want to use this as an opportunity to uplift La Sala de Pepe.
I was gonna do it too.
A space in the Lower East Side on Avenue C between 5th and 6th Street. Pepe has a massive library of music of our people. So I encourage Liv for you to check that out if you haven't already.
Chayanne, repeat the name again.
Yes, La Sala de Pepe.
La Sala de Pepe.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has some beautiful photography of musicians in that space. So it's a photo space as well as a music archive. So Liv, we strongly encourage you to go meet Pepe for one, and also see the beautiful collection he has both in his record collection as well as his photo archive. And the things that's been captured over the years in Lower East Side and the different musicians he's worked with. Okay, I'm going to jump into this next question for another anonymous attendee. How do we find grants or funding opportunities that are particular to photo archives? And I'm assuming any of you can answer that. Who knows the most about funding in this regard?
I did that for many, many years, and I continue to do it for the center. There are resources. There is, immediately what comes to mind is the Foundation Center, and it is a resource that you can go in person to their library or go online. and you can get very specific about what your search is for funding and see what sources come up. And then there are places like the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and the New York State Council on the Arts, specifically looking to support individuals. So if you're looking for individual funding, because a lot of these institutions fund organizations, but look for fellowships and individual grants and scholarships that will support individuals in the work that you're doing. And the money's out there.
Yes, it is. And I will also provide some resources via the website, archival resources, but also writing workshops and other resources that'll be available to you after this particular program. The next question is from Zaid Mohammed. He said, this was an amazing share, right on in Foco and CCC. How can we see more of Kathleen's pieces? We lost Maceo Geronimo, who died 27 years ago in prison, and Yuri, who was very dear to me personally. Do we know if Hiram did any photos of the Lords in Newark? I have Felipe in Newark in March talking to a whole generation. Baba Zaid Muhammad, Newark, New Jersey.
Thank you so much for your question, Zaid. Yes, I want to lift up Maceo Cleaver, and I want to lift up Geronimo as well, and Yuri. Yeah, and in terms of seeing more of Kathleen's work, they're Kathleen's archive. So right now they're at Emory, and we're trying to create this exhibit. One website though that you can look at is Inside Exile, which was a video archive project that was done as part of the process back in 2018, 2019, I believe. So Inside Exile is the website, and there are some images of the process of us archiving her collection. In terms of the actual photographs, these have never been seen, and our goal is to be able to exhibit them. But right now they're at Emory's archive, and you'd have to request to see them. And there is an online accessibility portal to be able to get to them. But you do have to ask permission. And again, this question around access. Yeah, so our goal is to hopefully be able to put on these exhibitions and bring them to the cities and have folks see these images. Yeah.
Thank you. So excited, Stephanie. Such a beautiful and amazing project. Thank you for sharing. And we look forward to seeing those photos when they are on exhibit.
We've got a question in the chat that's been there for a while. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no, go ahead, Oscar. Thank you.
From David Allen, how can/does this work to connect to college and secondary school students' education? I teach at the College of Staten Island at CUNY.
How can or does this work connect to college or high school students' education? I think that programs like this can be brought to colleges and high schools. I think probably working with the local librarians, working with, and asking the students themselves. This is the thing. Oftentimes we think that this is outside of what we already have, but like your students are archivists right now. If anything, like this younger generation is archiving everything that they do all the time. So I think it's really about tapping into the students that you have and thinking about how y'all can create your own archival projects as like, extra credit or, incorporate it into the curriculum. I think that it would be, an invitation for teachers to kind of incorporate this into curriculums and or to work with institutions to do like field trips to an archive or field trips to a specific library, field trips to a specific collection, and kind of incorporate that more into the curriculum, and even have archival research or tools be part of the history lesson or something like that, or even the literature or writing lesson. I think it's about thinking creatively as to how to bring archives into everything that you're already teaching.
Okay, another question from an anonymous attendee. Do you feel like you can ever go back to old work and expand in ways that you can apply to new work you create? Should I read it again? Do you feel like you can ever go back to old work and expand in ways that you can apply to your new work that you create?
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind is this feeling amongst creative people, this feeling that the work is really never done. But knowing within yourself that this is when I let it rest. And so to that question, for me, I think that's always an opportunity to revisit old work. Some things that I've published, I kind of have to like just let it go. You can't delay work. It's important to allow it to be seen by a public, to engage with people, so that in you can also grow in those ways as well.
Thank you, Chayanne. And then we have a question from Yao Yun Tang, and I'm going to read that really quick. And thank you for the presentation. I learned so many from these presenters today. Participated in Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute's program when younger. Can you speak about what are some programs, opportunities CCCADI and in Foco organized to support and inspire young people in the community? What works well and what have you learned? I don't know if that question is directed at us as people who have benefited from the work at the Caribbean Cultural Center programming from there, or if Melody would quickly like to speak that. We have 2 more questions, and then we're going to end with a very powerful, actually we have 5 questions in the Q&A. And then we'll wrap up because we are running out of time.
I think Stephanie hit it on the head when she said we need to ask our young people what they want, right? What they need, what they want to see. We just kicked off, I mean, historically, outside of your generation of young people, we have been working with young people in the public schools since the center started. And it's always been important to us to bring in teaching artists into the classrooms, who are the ones that look like the kids in the schools, right? So that the teaching artists come in and through art, teach history, teach culture, teach. Black history is American history. And so through the arts, we're able to tell, and we're in Black History Month, right? But we're celebrating Black culture all of the time. And so through the teaching artist residencies we take into the classroom, we have the opportunity for kids to see themselves, right? And to hear history through a different lens, learn about history through a different lens. That's one. The other is that we consistently have programs at the center that are about leadership development for young people. So we just launched a young women's leadership program that we called Sankofa, and we're using women in hip hop. We're addressing women in hip hop at a time where, while we're now celebrating 50 years of hip hop, we've never really focused on the contributions that women have made to that culture, to hip hop culture. And we're using it as a tool, again, using music and dance and the arts as the tool to empower young women and teach them about the leadership skills they already have. We're helping them to tap it. So we asked the young women what they wanted, and this is what they wanted. So we're constantly not reinventing, but we're constantly rethinking how best to draw in young people so that we can get them early and they understand who they are from a very early stage.
Thank you. And also, I want to just take this moment to advise whoever's listening in, whoever's watching tonight, to engage with our Nueva Luz archive as well. It's a very rich resource, and I think that it would benefit many people who engage with it. So check out Nueva Luz, the issues, think about subscribing, because it has a wealth of information that can be offered to the public. Also, I'll take some of these questions and maybe combine them, because we have like a series of questions in the chat now, a lot. So I'll try to combine a few of them. So, and then we'll address, except the ones that are directed directly to someone. So anonymous attendee says, can you please show work of Hiram Maristany? I'm new to his work and have one question. How has he inspired you? And then Zaid says, the Lords did an occupation of the Statue of Liberty to draw attention to getting Lolita Lebron and her comrades out of prison. Has Chayanne seen anything on that? And then he also says the Statue of Liberty action was in 1978. So Chayanne could address that particular one. And then another attendee says, thank you for bringing heart and imagination to this conversation. Love the work and all of the panelists are doing. What do you think will be the challenge for future archivists, given what sometimes feels like digital archiving excess in present social media, which I think that has been addressed in a couple of the responses. Crystal Harvin says, what are some ways you think this practice of archiving could be encouraged in accessible ways and not just seen as something for those in museums and academia? Also, do you think the lack of physical artifacts, photos, etc., in this increasingly digital world poses any threat to the ability for these stories to withstand time and be told in the future? I hope y'all remember some of these questions. The first one was about if Chayanne came across anything while she was in the Statue of Liberty archive that related back to Lolita Lebron. And I think then Corinne's question was about asking Chayanne as well about her research and Afro presence within the immigration experience in New York. And then Crystal's question, which I think is we talked about accessibility earlier, so just touching on that again, and then Jonathan Aiken as well. I am in the midst of cataloging my own archive of 50 years that include many artists of color. For instance, I have the largest collection of images of choreographer Leo Palmieri, rehearsing, laughing, walking, memes, the glass ceilings of how dance artists of color have been seen in the media. I would love to meet any one of you. Thank you. All right. Let's go. Anybody? I think Chayanne was the first question, and it's like, this is like rapid fire now. So let's do it rapid fire.
Baba Zaid, I typed an answer to your question in the chat as things were going, but I'll say that it was incredible to see how the Statue of Liberty has been a site of resistance by so many groups, so many liberation mobilizers, to the point that the National Park Service has designated a space for protest on Ellis Island as a way to contain and restrain them. But we see, I'm thinking of the action in 2016, that continues, that legacy of protest at the Statue of Liberty continues on. You're on mute, T.
The question from Corinne, and then the last one we'll start with Joanna. And we'll wrap up. The question with Corinne, just to remind you, is like, I love to hear Chayanne about her work with research and Afro presence within the immigration experience in New York. I would love to hear from Stephanie also about her work in archiving elders. But since we don't have a lot of time, like the research of the Afro presence and the immigration experiences that she had, because we never got back to that slide you had, but we're gonna end in like maybe a minute. See how fast.
With Corinne, email me. Let's really like chop it up. Text me, call me. I want to do justice to that work. I don't want to speed through it.
That's true. That's very true. Thank you, Chayanne. And then last one. Hello, I am enjoying very much tonight's program. Wondering what are 2 to 3 archival practices we can do for our families today. That was the last question from Joanne Castro. And we'll end there.
Stephanie, this sounds like it's perfect for you.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is if you're really overwhelmed, as if you have a lot of family photos, for example, the easiest way to start organizing them for yourself is one, by categories, and then another option is you have by years. And if you want to scan them, you're gonna need an external hard drive. And there's, depending on which phone you have, There's different scanning apps that you can download that have really good quality, actually. I used to think I needed to get a really fancy scanner, and I probably still do need to get that. But in the meantime, what you can do is use your phone to scan your pictures and then save them in the external hard drive. And yes, start by years 70s, 80s, 90s. There's a toolkit that's going to be shared in the resources that has all the steps as to how to start your own archive as well. So definitely look out for that document that will be shared with y'all as well. And it could be found on my website too. But yeah, I would say start with just organizing by category or by year. If you have a bunch of baby pictures, start and just put my baby pictures, a bunch of pictures of your grandma, pictures of my grandmother, and just start there, just as simple as possible. So not overwhelm yourself, I would say that.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was beautiful. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And thank you for, again, engaging with us about this archival practice, continuing a legacy, these points of continuity. And I'll just end here and say, circulation of images change the distance between creativity and narratives of domination. And that's a quote by Tricia Rose. And I want to thank Caribbean Cultural Center, Stephanie, Chayanne, and Melody Capote for joining us this evening. And thank you, Danny Parrata, for bringing us together, us all in communion together. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. And look out for post programs for within Foco as well, from our archive and our poster exhibition, as well as our study center, which launches very soon in March. So thank you all. And then some of your questions can be answered there as well. And Nueva Luz, of course. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you.